I think we all as designers have stashes of fabric and you want to try to use up as much fabric as you can. But really, I think my focus in the zero waste really became alive when I was inspired by Mel and her work.
Is really a big math problem and geometry of fitting all these puzzle pieces together.
We have one pattern that can be cut at one time, and then the bands are added to make the different sizes. So all sizes are being cut at the same time, and then the bands are added, small to large.
We were able to get funded to do a sustainable design using hemp fabric.
We've really held ourselves to using every thread. But it is not easy.
Hello, welcome to Innovation Insights Live. Today we are privileged to engage with a remarkable panel of experts who are all part of a dedicated team that is researching zero-waste fashion design. This team is composed of passionate faculty members from universities nationwide, and they bring a knowledge and expertise to sustainable and innovative fashion design. So one method that they're using is the Carrico zero waste banded grading technique. This technique allows zero waste garments to be produced across a full range of sizes. So by inserting variable width fabric bands at strategic seam locations, this technique solves a major challenge in zero waste design and ensures that zero waste apparel is sustainable, scalable, and suitable for a diverse group of body types. So let us welcome our guest. And I've been fortunate to know each of these individuals for years, like decades, some of them decades. So here we go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. So I'll go ahead and have everyone unmute their microphones. And to our guests in the audience, please use the comment section on your platform, whether you're on LinkedIn or Facebook, and add your comments, and I will monitor those as we go through the discussion. So let's start with our guest. Our first guest that we have is Melanie Carrico, who is an associate professor at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, in the apparel design concentration. We also have Sherry Fu, who is the Mary Gibbs Jones Endowed Department Chair and Professor in the Department of Human Sciences and Design at Baylor University. We have Colleen Moretz, who is an associate professor in fashion design and merchandising in the School of Art and Design at West Virginia University. And next, we have Ashley Rougeau-Burns, who is the program director of apparel design and manufacturing at Texas Tech University, where she also serves as an associate professor. And then we have Casey Stannard, who is an associate professor in textiles, apparel design, and merchandising at Louisiana State University. And we had another member of the team is Ellen McKinney, who is professor and head of the Department of Clothing, Textiles, and Interior Design at the University of Alabama. Unfortunately, due to some last minute change with some travel plans, Ellen was not able to join us today. Again, thank you for being here, everyone. We're so thrilled to have you here. Especially right now, because many of us are also getting ready to travel to a conference next week. So I know it's a busy time of the year. So thank you. Let's start off with my first question, which is what initially inspired each of you to focus on zero waste techniques in your research and design practices? Melanie, let's start with you.
Okay. Actually, my initial foray into zero waste pattern making was brought about by my major professor at North Texas, Marian O'Rourke Kaplan, suggesting that I do a zero waste pattern making challenge that was part of the Association of Sewing and Design Professionals group. They do a challenge with Threads magazine every year and have an exhibition of some of the garments at their conference. And so I was like, gosh, this sounds interesting and fun. And so that was how I got into it. That was, I don't know, over 10 years ago, I think now.
That's not too long ago. I feel. Sherry, how about you?
So I probably came and playing around with design. I think we all as designers have stashes of fabric and you want to try to use up as much fabric as you can. But really, I think my focus in the zero waste really became alive when I was inspired by Mel and her work and decided that was something I wanted to help explore with her and maybe build a team around. And I was grateful to get to be inspired by a colleague.
Wow, wonderful. Collaboration is so important. And so that's good. Colleen, how about you?
It's been longer than 10 years. 15 years ago, I took a master class with Jillian Roberts in New York City. So it started me, and I really have had projects in my classroom probably since then in zero waste. And I came up with the zero waste spiral design that I do different iterations. And I really love being in this group because it's really challenged my thinking and designing zero waste.
Oh, wonderful. That's great that you're integrating it into the classroom too. Ashley,
Hi. So I'm probably the newest to sustainable research and zero waste design. I really didn't get my start until we started this project. What was it? Back in 2020, 2021, something like that. But I was really interested in it when Mel invited me to be part of the group. I was very interested in it because I have a math mind, and growing up, I really liked puzzles and like Tetris and all of those kinds of things. And it's really is really a big math problem and geometry of fitting all these puzzle pieces together. It was something that I was really excited to be a part of, and it really works that part of my brain, and I enjoy it.
oh, that makes sense. Pattern makers, it's for math people, it's geometry. Oh, Casey.
I think a lot of the same reasons as everyone's already stated. Definitely have that pattern maker brain. I'm very interested in pattern forward design. It's always been something I've cared a lot about. And then I know the first piece I did, it was because I didn't want to waste my beautiful wool melton. So it all had to go in the design.
That makes sense. Fabric is precious. It's precious. Oh, what are some of the challenges with approaching zero waste design? And let's see, who would like to start?
I'll jump into this one if that's okay. I think we've all talked about the challenges of zero waste. The fun piece of zero waste is that no matter what project is going to be sustainable. So I think that drives all of us to really work on and explore ways to push this out into the industry in greater capacity. But some of the challenges are that it's typically a single size niche market design, and you get fairly non-fitted apparel out of zero waste design. And so it's really hard to, in a mass market sense, how do we get this out there into the mass market? I think that's the piece that has been so great about Mel's technique, is that it's trying to established the groundwork to make this feasible in an industrialized setting. And I think it challenges each one of us as we explore our own pattern making in zero waste, but ways to really incorporate that graded size range to fit the mass market and mass consumer.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Is there anyone else that has something to add to that?
I would definitely say that working in zero waste makes you really appreciate different shapes of patterns or hate them. Those arm size and those crotch curves, you're like, oh, you're so terrible. I have to now work around you and figure out what to do. But kind of develop sort of a workaround for a lot of these shapes where, okay, we'll put a yoke here and now suddenly it's not so bad. It can become a pocket. I think the more you play with zero waste, the more you start to come up with your sort of go-to solutions.
That makes sense. 'Cause the human body, it's round. And fabric is square and flat in 2D. So Oh,
Is it usually does take more time because, like, when I worked as a pattern maker, the designer handed down a sketch to me. I made the pattern for it without any consideration of how the two pieces were going to interact with each other in the marker. Yeah, it usually does take a good bit more time to figure it all out.
that makes sense. And that can impact industry adoption and scalability. And yeah,
I think we've all said that it kind of flips the design process. So it almost makes you really think about the production piece of it, the marker, before you almost go into the design phase. So it really is a nuanced approach to designing, very challenging.
And I think talking about as we go along, we've become more familiar with how pieces can fit. And I think that it's a challenge now to get a pattern. It takes forever. But I think as people get experienced in this, I think it can become something that it becomes less and less boggling to have everything fit.
would one of you be willing to explain what a marker is in case we have audience members who do not know what a marker is?
Sure. So the marker is going to be how you're laying your pattern pieces out for cutting on the fabric. We typically are trying to get those pieces as close together as possible so that we're not wasting the fabric. Fabric's very expensive, but we're looking at in the industry usually a loss of 10 to 15% of the fabric just from cutting. It just goes on the floor. It's waste. But in a zero waste approach, you actually alter those pattern pieces ever so slightly. So everything perfectly tessels together and nothing is wasted.
So we have the Carrico zero waste banded grading technique. And I would like for Melanie to tell us a little bit about this technique and how it was developed and what makes it unique from traditional pattern making techniques.
All right. Years ago now, about 10, I guess, I was just working on what I thought was going to be another zero waste, just typical zero waste garment. I had in mind the boho style trend was big at the time. So I had in mind to do like a white blouse with some lace worked, little strips of lace worked throughout it. And as I was draping on the dress form, just going back and forth between what the pattern shape looked like flat compared to its friends, and then looking at it on the dress form and thinking about where I was going to put these different strips of lace, I was seeing some lines that were reminding me of what you would see in your basic pattern grading, textbook, where it divides up the body and says you have to enlarge it here some and here some. Because for people who aren't familiar with pattern grading, our bodies don't grow like proportionally. You can't just take a pattern and put it on the Xerox machine and say up 20% or down 15% or whatever. Busts grow a lot more than so. You chop up the pattern in different areas and grow or shrink it to get the different sizes. But that I wasn't intending to come up with any way of grading the patterns. It just was like serendipitous that I looked at that and said, and I think the fact that I was using lace as well, because then I said, what if instead of a 1 inch wide piece, I put in a 1.5 inch here? And what if instead of that, it was, narrower? And so I went on, made the blouse and did the math in my head and said, yeah, I think this can work. And then just played around with some more variations of it, revisited some of my previous zero waste designs that I thought I could put some strips of something, fabric or lace or what have you in. And I felt like I was onto something. Yeah, I have. So like this was working just in working it out. This is not the final fabric, but a pant leg. And you can see a couple of bands here. And of course, they would widen for a larger size and narrow down for a smaller size. So that's how I came upon the idea. Do you want to hear from somebody else what makes it different?
Sure. Thank you. That was great. It was cool. It's just very cool. So anyone else that has anything to add?
I'll dive in to when Melanie first created her approach and then presented it at ITAA, our professional organization meeting. I think a lot of us went, "Oh, wow, that is very interesting." And so we just got together and started talking about, wouldn't it be great to prove this concept? And what better way to prove the concept than to get a group of professionals who do this and teach this and research in this field for a living and get them together and to explore, approach it in a variety of different categories and classifications of apparel, and then across size ranges. And so that's where we all got to jump in with Melanie and work on her concept and really help prove her concept. So that it's been a great learning experience, I would say, for all of us. Challenging and a learning experience.
Oh, well, and working with bands and strips really does impact. Colleen, would you talk a little bit about your thoughts about how do you aesthetically?
I think with our first iteration that we did, we realized that as it got bigger and the bands got bigger or got smaller, that it did really change it aesthetically. So we thought it's something that we're going to have to address to our future customers, explain to them what this is about. But I have to say that since we've been working on these scrubs and we're doing the bands the same as what the fabric is, I don't think there's just much. I don't. It doesn't seem to stand out blatantly that this is something different. I know. What does everybody else think?
No, I agree. I've actually got some visuals. Am I able to screen share so you can kind of?
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay.
I will say, like with the aesthetics, you can find examples just in regular fashion of garments that have inserted bits, pants with stripes down the side. I have a whole Pinterest for clothes with bands, just to prove that it's not as far off the aesthetic track as you might think.
And we've also gotten to a point where we've learned to play sometimes contrast band, sometimes self band that hides. So we've also learned as we've done our iterations how to harness that as well. Because we're actually on our 4th round of iterations. So each time we do a new design, all of us.
And I have to say, I have a piece that's going to be in ITA in California. And so I really wanted to make it, and I did 3 different sizes, and I really wanted to make it so that and I did contrast. And I think it really did show that it can have different feelings, and it was very marketable, I feel, as far as going from the small size to the larger size. And it was, again, using the banding as a contrast as a design element.
I like that. One thing I was going to ask, you mentioned that you have 4 iterations. So how do you work as a team? Because you're across the United States at various locations. And so And that's what was really intriguing to me. When Casey mentioned to me that you were working together and as a team. So how does that work?
Thank heavens for technology, right? Zoom and all of that. And then, of course, every professional conference, we're back together and meeting over details. But I think all of our iterations have been we get together and we set goals for what that iteration is. And as we said earlier, when we first started, we said, okay, what category do you like to design in? So everybody identified a category to design in. So that sets some framework. And then we followed up with, okay, we're going to design this approach and you need to scale it from this size, a higher size and a lower size. So we again set some guidelines and then each dove into that project. Um, Y'all talk about maybe from phase 1 to 2, 3, etc.
Yeah, definitely. So the very first year, we were still recovering from COVID teaching, and we were all in need of a creative challenge. We all jumped at this, and again, we chose our category, we made our garments. And from that, we were like, let's do some feedback. Let's talk postmortem, what went right, what went wrong, learn from each other. Let's do it again, but a different type of garment. That was really the second challenge was like, okay, can I learn from my first iteration to do a better version, which I think was really valuable. I personally am very terrible about iterating anything. So it's very nice to like actually go back and be like, okay, now I'm going to see how I can do this better. The third iteration, we really wanted to focus on, can we produce this? Let's think really industry applicability. Like, all right, we actually got someone to come and speak to us about our technique. Sherry got one of her alums who's out there as a pattern maker. And she gave us some wonderful feedback about would this even be doable? And so we had to rethink a lot of things. We talked a lot about proportion of the bands. I was using very standard grading. I was like, yep, these bands are skinny on the small and they're big on the big. And she did not like the proportionality of my band. So I had to completely redo my grading system. But it was good. It was very valuable. So the third round, we did that really industry applicable one. And now we're actually working on a fourth, which is proof of concept for production.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what they were talking about with the grading lines, where we start off typical pattern grading. This is a slash and spread method where you've got the kind of mustard colored lines. And these are the areas where the pattern would typically need to grow or shrink to go to different sizes. And so Melanie's original concept was, what if we put fabric, basically make a seam at those lines and then put a strip of trim or fabric in there and that strip can get larger or smaller to grade to the different sizes. And like they were saying, this whole design process is flipped from normal because you've really got to consider where those seams are going to go in first so that you can make sure that you're grading in the proper places. And then with the kind of pieces that you're left behind with, you have to then put it into a zero waste pattern. You're designing this garment with the idea that these bands are going to go in. So this was a jacket from the very first iteration that we did. And these dark gray and light gray strips are where we put in bands to allow the garment to grow or shrink to a smaller size. And so we usually start with a mid-range size pattern, and then the bands will get smaller or bigger from there. And then we create our zero waste pattern. So this over on the right-hand side is a color-coded version of the pattern so that you can see where each of those pieces go into the actual garment. And so you're using up every little piece. You can see on the inside that circle detail shot. There's a little tiny key pocket because I had one little piece of rectangle fabric that I needed to use up. And so I put a pocket inside the garment to use that up. So you really have to get creative with solutions on how you're getting all this into the garment. And then, so this is the final version sewn up. So this was the mid-range size. And then they were talking about kind of proportions and those bands looking visually different from size to size. So we've come up with a couple of different creative solutions on what band size we're starting with so that as it grows and shrinks, it's not as drastic and we don't have as big a difference. But another one is self bands. And that's what we're doing in our most recent iteration that we're working on right now, where it is a band. You can see here on the shoulder, across the bicep, down the sleeve, there are all bands that are out of the exact same fabric as the main body of the jacket so that they blend in a lot more and it's just a lot less noticeable that they're there. And so that if they grow or shrink, you're not really seeing that difference as much. And then
But it's beautiful aesthetic, though.
yeah, and it does add texture, like it's interest without it being in your face. And so I really enjoy it as well. And then that first iteration, we sewed up different sizes so that we could see how this applies to those different sizes. So on this left-hand picture, that very left hand is the largest size that I sewed up. I believe it was I want to say 14. And then my mid-range was a 10. And then the smallest one I did was a 6. And so you can see, and I did this with contrasting fabric so that you really could see the visual difference of where those bands are at, but also aesthetically how they change from size to size. And so that's what we got a lot of feedback from our industry professional that came in. Her name's Liz Enoch. And she gave us feedback. And that was one of the things that she was worried about, whether the customer would accept those differences. And so we had to come up with some creative ways to make that aesthetic difference a little less drastic. And then we'll see for this iteration that we're doing, we are going to have some wear testing and we're going to get feedback from actual customers.
We'll have to have you back after that.
Too, that Ashley won an international award with that design. So
Thank you.
very proud of her.
Pretty cool achievement.
Congratulations. Yeah, deserved too. I have a pattern making background from industry, and I really feel that this is scalable and really doable. That's my opinion for whatever it's worth. But I am biased, and that is a bit of a pun there for those of you that are pattern makers. I am biased because also I love industry on this panel. So you all are faculty members and you're working with students. So how have students really approached zero waste? I'm hoping that you share what you're doing with your students, and are they embracing this and excited about it? And who wants to start with that one?
I have to say that I challenge my students, and I've done this for years at 3 different universities. And usually it's in the draping class. I challenge them with a zero waste project. And I don't let them do upcycling. They have to actually figure it out using every bit of the fabric, and then they have to put it in, do it digitally. And then the additional piece that I add to it is they have to do an engineered print. So they have to design an engineered print. So some of it could be like they could create a band, they could create some kind of stitching or whatever to accentuate the zero waste. So it really, again, same thing like talking about us and how you really have to think mathematically. And it really does make the students really think. It's really, I see finally like the light bulb go off when they finally get it. But they're so excited to get back to the regular way of designing because it's really challenging. But I have to say that I really, the students are up for the challenge. It takes them a minute to grasp it, but a lot of really interesting things have come out of that.
Would you explain a little bit about engineered prints too? Because combining that with zero waste, oh my goodness.
They have
Brain
to take,
power.
they have to create once they've created the patterns, then they've got to create them digitally. And then from that, they design a pattern. And it could be, I had a student the last year, she did a toile. And so on the toile, she was at her sewing machine. So you'd have to look really closely to see that's what the toile was. So she did a pattern made out of that. And I've had them trying to think of some of the other things, but many of them have made it into ITAA. And there's 2 that are going to be on design or on exhibit at a school exhibit. But Again, just the engineer print again gives them an extra thing that they have to think about, come up with an idea and make it work.
Yeah. Oh, but that's great that you're challenging your students because it really is also challenging critical thinking and just taking that to a whole other level for designers. Are there any product categories that this technique lends itself to more than others?
I'd say we've learned that you're putting in so much time and effort into the pattern. If you're doing this mass production, you really want to get as much use out of that pattern as possible. Garments that aren't trendy, that don't go out in and out of season quickly, that are staples that stay in your closet for a really long time, I think will be the best application so that you could keep the pattern the same from season to season, maybe just change out the fabric, colors, and have that as a consistent style within your brand. So I think that's a really good application. Garments that don't change a lot, medical garments. I did a trench coat, the standard from season to season, those kinds of things that don't just change quickly because you're going to put a lot of effort into this pattern. You don't want to have to redo that every season.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Pants are a challenge. I was like, we've all realized pants are a challenge because the body grows differently. And so that's
Yeah.
not been super easy, but
Like Casey was saying with that crotch curve, those curves are really hard to fit into a pattern and find uses for kind of that empty space, the negative space inside that curve. So it does pose a big challenge.
I
I
think
can
the
imagine.
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sherry.
I was going to say, I think the other challenge is we're constantly as a group looking for what is the best application for this technique. And we've tried everything from children's wear to menswear, plus size apparel, loungewear, outerwear. What am I missing, y'all?
Formal. I did
Formal.
formal.
active.
So we've tried to cover all the categories to explore how the technique works the best. But ultimately, I think the biggest challenge as we're stepping into this maybe fourth iteration is to really think about how do we create a garment that is consistent with what's in the industry. And Ashley's correct. Trend forward is classic is better because it'll carry and it's timeless. But you're still having to think through how do I reduce the number of seams because every band that goes in is two seams that you're sewing where there might not have ever been a seam to begin with. Part of the application is thinking through the classification of apparel and what allows for seams, both aesthetically, but then also how can you reduce the number of total seams that you're creating in a garment to make it feasible and financially feasible for apparel producers. It is a challenge, I think, to figure that out. And we're exploring a lot.
I think the plus is that we have one pattern that can be cut at one time, and then the bands are added to make the different sizes. So all sizes are being cut at the same time, and then the bands are added, small to large.
Every size in the size range uses that same zero waste base pattern. So you can cut down time on cutting those.
That makes sense. That makes sense. It really also makes sense too that you're thinking about products that are not fast fashion. You have a socially responsible pattern making method, and then if you apply it to fast fashion, that might, yeah. So more classic pieces that are investment pieces,
Uniform.
heirloom. Yeah, uniforms. Yeah, yeah. And that would save so much for so many industries to have this applied to uniforms. That's really great. Yeah. As you were talking, you mentioned that, you've done different product categories. Again, as you're working as a team on this, because I'm really fascinated on a kind of a system level, how you work as a team, because we don't see this a lot. In academia, period, and especially in design, and one that's functioning well and making it through several iterations. As you work as a team, talk to me a little bit more about that. So, do each of you develop your own design? And you said you get some feedback from each other and then you decide. You ever work on one product or design all together and send pieces back and forth? And how
Yes.
does that-
We've done
Yeah.
both.
Yes.
We've done both. We've done all. We started out doing, we're going to meet, we're going to determine the rules, and everybody breaks out and does their own thing. And then we came back and we looked at our muslins and we discussed, and then we went back. So we've done that. And now we're working collaboratively on a single design. And what we ended up having to do was create different roles. So we have two pattern makers. Ashley and Colleen have been the pattern wizards. And then Sherry has really been our production manager. So she's like handling production and kind of keeping us on the straight and narrow. Mel has helped a lot with the fabric, and then also just bringing in like the actual production of, here's our tech pack, these are the steps. And I'm the grant PI, so I've been handling that side of let's pay the bills. That's boring, but you have to just know that you can't all do everything, and we're okay with that. I know that Ashley and Colleen are awesome pattern makers, and I'm totally cool with them making the pattern. And then they eventually called us and were like, okay, everyone go make a size of this pattern we've created, and we're coming together and look at it.
And Ellen helped out a lot with the grading, the size charts, and in those
Ellen
kind of
made
things.
an awesome size analysis of the current market offerings, which was really cool. And
I can imagine that. I can imagine that knowing her. Yes. Oh, and what a functioning team. And that's dividing up the work and trusting each other to get your parts done. Now, tell me about the grant. So you mentioned that you have a grant, because we probably will have some individuals interested in grants or academics that might be interested in grants. So we'd like to talk about the grant.
I guess I'll talk about the grant. It's actually from the LSU Ag Center. We have a initiative here in hemp research. And so we were able to get funded to do a sustainable design using hemp fabric. And we're actually incorporating industrial production of one of our designs. And so we're going to have it produced and determine, is it feasible? How much more does it cost? Et cetera, et cetera. And then we're going to do some wear trials. So Sherry has set us up for wear trials, which is going to be awesome.
We're excited. We have an occupational therapy program at Baylor that is virtual, but they do immersion. And so they have agreed to, during their immersion, do some wear testing for us. So we're very excited about that. And I think that it's going to really help us prove this concept is feasible, and we'll get consumer feedback on both the aesthetics of the design and the wearability of the fabric and fit and function. They do a lot of moving, so we should get some really excellent feedback.
That is so important. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Is it a multi-year grant project or?
It's a single year as of right now. And I do want to emphasize that we did apply for other funding, and we're going to continue to do, but definitely for design researchers, just, know what you're good at. And you may be told no a lot, but you just keep going and try to figure out how you can make your project go.
Wow. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I continue to monitor the comments. I don't see any comments. So if anyone has questions for this group, please, in our audience, please put them in the comments and address those. So what are some of the next steps for this team?
Yeah, we've got to get these garments produced. So it's in the works right now. And this time next year, we should know a whole lot. But in the spring is our projected date for the production and the wear trials. And then we have to do all our analysis and postmortems. See.
And hopefully publishing the result.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And that's another thing that our team has really been successful on is we have steamrolled this into multiple outcomes. We're getting designs every single year. We're writing papers. We published a journal article on this in sustainability. We have, I think, 3 planned for this next iteration. That's the other thing of harvesting so many people onto a project and using their different backgrounds is we're really being able to be very productive.
Excellent. Excellent. We have a question from a guest. So Melissa Thompson, she is asking, has fabric type been a factor in your designs and knit versus woven, natural fibers versus synthetic fibers? Melissa, thank you for your question.
Yeah. The design process definitely starts with the fabric. So when we're making that zero waste base pattern, we have to know what textile we're using first because we need to know exactly how wide it is and make sure that we're patterning to that width. So typically in our normal design process, we're drawing out the sketch first, making the pattern, and then you may get swatches and select your textiles. Third step through the process, but it's one of the very first steps now. So I've really only worked with natural fibers, but I know some of the other people in our group, Melanie has done some knits and mine have all been woven. But Mel, do you want to talk about using knits and how that is different?
Sure. Yeah. Knit, in some ways, it could be not different at all. You could work with them the same way. My active wear, there were some advantages to the knit. I played with the fact that it stretches and gives some in funky areas. That I could put a slightly odd pattern shape somewhere and I knew it was still going to fit the body because it would stretch and give. Everybody loved knits because of that. But then selecting my band material, I found a fabric that was like two-sided. It was lighter on one side than the other. So a double knit. And I just used the opposite side so that I had very consistent stretch and drape and weight and all of that. Whereas in a woven, you can mix in some different fabrics a little easier with different properties. But yeah, I've done both. Prefer wovens.
Yeah. I think the big challenge with wovens is, and maybe it's a positive and a negative, is working with a fabric that is printed or with a nap in a woven. When you're building a zero waste pattern, you potentially want to be able to turn your pattern sideways and do cross grain versus lengthwise grain and sometimes diagonal grain. But I think Ashley's jacket there were lots of diagonals on hers. But if you've got nap, then that changes the tone or the color of the piece. And that's fine if it's a band. We had talked about inserting straight of grain bands or bias cut bands. So if you have something tonal, then you have to worry about how visually that looks in the garment. You don't want one body side being one tone and the other being something different because of the.
We've also.
So now, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we've also played with the idea of mixing the two, having the main body of the garment be woven, but some of those bands be knit to allow for that ease of wear and that stretch where you need it.
We've run into a lot of interesting situations. I've done a few where I've actually done lining as well in my zero waste to make my life difficult. So yeah, all of it's very interesting and you really have to understand your fabric really well before you even start with your pattern idea.
Now, my last design, I did use a directional fabric. So that was a challenge in creating the pattern. But I just wanted to be able to do that in order to see if I could do it more than anything. And then the fabric, luckily, on the opposite side was plain. So I used that actually as the banding.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Well, we have some pictures of some of your work too. When I edit this broadcast, I will insert some photos and we'll tell the story because it's just amazing. So one question that I have for everyone that I ask everyone that gets on a live camera or recorded camera with me is, how do you define innovation? Melanie, let's start with you.
Oh, good. Yes. Narrowly, with it as it relates to zero waste, I like the innovative aspect that it does, as we've mentioned before, use both the pattern maker side of the brain and the designer side of the brain, which is not how our industry typically works. We're very siloed. But I'm going to borrow somebody's quote on innovation because I'm much better at words. But there are better people with words than me. But this I came across from Selena Paris. She's from the World Fair Trade Organization. And I really liked it. Innovation doesn't mean letting go of what we have. It just means taking what we have and making it better. I thought that was really good.
That's great. That is great. Well, thank you. Sherry, how about you?
Yeah, I think innovation to me, I think as creative souls, we all innovate almost every day in what we do. Innovation in the classroom and innovation in this work. But I think the innovation piece for us is really using technology that is available to us and being able to take that and really explore new and creative applications for that technology that innovate a product category into something it is not currently that grows into the potential that it can be. And I think that's where we'd all like to see zero waste be innovated into something, again, very welcomed by the industry.
I agree with you. Colleen, how about you?
I have to say, Sherry hit it, that really trying to come up with something that has not been really, I guess it's been explored, but I think we've got possibly a solution. And for me, innovation, it's what drives me. Drives me to be creative, drives me to want to find something different. It's why I design. Come up with some kind of different iteration, some kind of different idea. So that's what it means to me personally. But I say, as far as our group, I think Sherry really hit what it is that we're trying to be innovative about.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ashley.
Yeah. The phrase that went through my head when I heard that question was just creative problem solving. Innovation typically stems from a need that's unfulfilled or a desire to make something more efficient, better designed. And so you're using those creative skills for us, especially those math mind skills, engineering skills, to come up with a more efficient, better designed product, or a product that doesn't exist and you're filling a need that hasn't been filled in the past.
That makes sense. As a pattern maker and designer, yes. Casey, how about you?
I think my group mates have really hit it on the head there. We've really thought about how we can take our current set of skills, vast and broad as it may be, and apply it to a real world problem and really try to push that forward. So yeah, our innovation is just really continuing to do what we do, but being open to shifting and changing.
Yeah, that openness, that's so important. Oh, we have a couple more questions. So Melissa has another question about the potential of AI in assisting with zero waste designs.
Sherry and I last summer met with Shelley Zhu, XU is her last name. And she is with SX Designs trying to develop some AI ways of zero wasting the pattern and grading the pattern and that kind of thing, which is great because I don't think the bans are for every government. So in that way, maybe there can be some more innovations with using machine learning.
I like that. I like that. Yeah.
And
It'll be fun to see. Oh, sorry, Sherry.
I was going to say she is in the data gathering stage and really trying to test out if those who are listening, if they have a zero waste pattern that is not a banded pattern, send it to her because she will run it through her system. And I think the more data she gets, the better the more feasible it is that she ends up with a system that really works for using AI in zero waste. So I think I'm all for it. If we all can contribute to a more sustainable focus for the world, I think the better off we all are.
Hani, I hope I'm saying your name correct, is a graduate student and has started experimenting with zero waste design, which is fabulous. And mentions that after she's completed some garments, that she's noticed that she has a few scraps of fabric left over. And if this group has any ideas on how to effectively use these in design, since embellishment is an obvious option. But have you encountered this challenge, and what ideas do you have to overcome this?
You just have to get comfortable with adding extra bits to things you might have. We put a hammer loop on our latest design, which I personally love hammer loops, but I don't know how useful they really actually are. But I'm like, all right, a hammer loop. Or like a key pocket. Mel, you stuffed buttons with some of your scraps.
Yes, I made a jacket that's in the hemp impressions. Is that what you
Yeah.
exhibit that Casey curated? And I also wanted to make the whole jacket like compostable. So it was buttoned, but I made these sort of little pillowy shapes and stuffed them with fabric. Yeah. To use up some of those scraps, but little pockets, and yeah, it can get a little tedious with some tiny bits. And I think most people allow for maybe 1% or 2% that does just go waste and still call it zero waste. But so far, we've really held ourselves to using every thread. Yeah. But it's not easy.
Like that. Oh, we're almost at the top of the hour. Does anyone have any last comments they want to make?
But just thank you to viewers for the questions.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Thank you for your questions. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to our panelists, or you can reach out to Innovation Insights, and I'll forward them to the team. And thank you, each of you, for being here. I look forward to seeing you next week and discussing this more. And we will get this live out on our podcast channel on YouTube. But thank you each for sharing your experiences and your knowledge. Again, for me, I've admired each of your work, and so this is wonderful to hear a little bit more about it, and your leadership within our discipline and the overall fashion industry. So thank you for that. For our audience, thank you for being here. Thank you for your questions, and watch out for other live events that you have. If you have ideas for topics, please email me, let us know. We're open to sharing so many different stories. And until next time, keep innovating, keep dreaming, and keep making a difference.